Broadcasting live from Forward Observer Central Command in Austin, Texas. It's the man always out front on the issues. You're listening to Out Front with Mike Shelby.
All right. Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to Out Front. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. On today's show, I'm going to briefly mention these French elections that are coming up here, I guess this weekend. We're going to talk about investors buying up U.S. farmland. Nothing new, but here's an interesting take. We're going to continue yesterday's talk about BRICs because, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, because I think that's very important. And then with the remaining time we have today, I may need to devote an entire show to doing this, but I kind of hate being I don't want to be like a partisan, grudge fest kind of show. I mean, you get that so many other places. I don't want to perpetuate the outrage machine, because what tends to happen is we get outraged out, right? It's like, oh, Trump did this. Oh, Biden's doing this. And I'm outraged. And then you're outraged every day. And after a while, it's like, yeah, I mean, this guy's doing this outrageous thing. Like, it's Tuesday or it's Thursday, and you tend to ignore it. If they just do enough outrageous stuff, then you ignore it and give up because there's nothing you can do to change it. All right. So at any rate, we're going to talk about preparedness networks, how to get started with your preparedness network. I think it's very important that if we're going to be pessimists about this stuff, or realists, as I like to say, that we be proactive about it and improve our situation. But first, the shout down of the day, which, by the way, I've got two of these today. Well, first off, we're going to start with Nancy Pelosi, because she was scheduled to go to Japan this weekend. And then allegedly, according to Bloomberg News, she was scheduled to go visit Taiwan. And I talked about that on this morning's Daily SA, and you can go back and watch that video on our channel. Well, overnight, a spokesman for China's foreign ministry was asked about this from a Bloomberg News reporter, and he had some pretty choice words to say. Again, if you want the details, it's in this morning's situational awareness. But no sooner, I think is maybe like an hour or two after we finished the live stream, breaking news: Nancy Pelosi has tested positive for the virus right before her trip to Japan, and oddly enough, right before her trip to Taiwan, which is oddly convenient, seeing as how she was about to cause an international incident. And I think Biden may have given her the virus on purpose just so that she wouldn't go to Taiwan. By the way, I noted this morning that I think that was directly from a Chinese official. I think that was probably the most forceful message to date. Basically, they're going to firmly push back, and there's going to be consequences, and it's going to harm they say everything's going to harm the U.S.-China relationship. But I think they're actually serious about this, because Pelosi going to Taiwan would lend a large amount of legitimacy to the Taiwan independence, the Taiwan independence movement here. All right. Before we get to the next item here, I have a second shout down of the day, and that goes out to Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, who all the way back in 2020 announced to us, and oh my gosh, he got a lot of pats on the back. He started talking about the next phase of American power. And you may have heard of this buzz phrase called integrated deterrence. And I don't know if this was Lloyd Austin's brainchild or if it was Raytheon's brainchild. Raytheon, by the way, is his former employer. But Austin owns this thing now. Integrated deterrence is this new-fangled Pentagon concept. It's not much more than a buzz phrase. But the plan was they are going to weave this web of U.S. security partners and allies. And instead of the U.S. providing all the deterrence, they're going to share the load. And actually in this speech, introducing this concept of integrated deterrence, Lloyd Austin said, yeah, this is a responsibility for everybody. It's not just the United States anymore. And really, I think that was probably just a way to cut U.S. military and defense spending, which, by the way, probably deserves to be cut because there's so much fraud, waste, and abuse in there. But I really think it was a backdoor way to cut U.S. military spending and put the load on other countries to deter aggression from Russia and China. This is the whole concept of integrated deterrence. Use a number of countries, a number of security partners and allies, and also a number of capabilities, not just military, not just hard power, but soft power. So sanctions, geopolitical relations, diplomatic relations, so on. And the question is, has integrated deterrence worked, specifically in Europe, in Ukraine? And the answer is, well, actually, I'll tell you the answer right here. You know who gave a much better answer than I could is Representative Mike Gallagher. He's a Republican from Wisconsin. You may have seen this video. It kind of went viral last month. This was the House Armed Services Committee had a hearing on, I think this is actually on Navy Sea Power. I don't know. Max covered it because he's a Marine. At any rate, this Representative Gallagher eviscerated Admiral William Lester, who is the vice chair of naval operations during this hearing. And he asked the admiral, quote, if we're using the strategy of integrated deterrence in Ukraine, what did it deter? And the answer was absolutely crickets. Gallagher went on to explain that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was, quote, the first real world test of integrated deterrence, and it failed. Now, this is actually a little more important than what went on in this hearing, because integrated deterrence is the cornerstone of the national defense strategy that's set to be, it's already been published. So apparently the Pentagon gave a copy of it to Congress last week. We're just waiting on the unclassified version. Allegedly, that's coming out. As soon as we get it, Max, Dustin, and I are going to read through it and pick the thing apart and figure it out. And we'll give you a brief on it, probably maybe a couple days after it comes out. Here's the problem. Americans were told, they were effectively promised that integrated deterrence is the solution to ensuring global peace and security. It's the cornerstone of the national defense strategy. And it was kind of billed as the future of American power. But just yesterday, U.S. Strategic Command's Admiral Charles Richard, he's at U.S. Stratcom, U.S. Strategic Command. U.S. Strategic Command came out and it told Congress that the United States military has, quote, a deterrence and assurance gap. So this entire strategy they've billed as the future of American power for 2 years has not worked in the past 2 years. There's a significant amount of doubt that it's going to work over the next 2 years, or that it can be fixed over the next 2 years. And so this is why Lloyd Austin gets the shout down of the day. If integrated deterrence was dead on arrival and it failed its first major test, by the way, its second major test is Taiwan, there is no third major test after that, then I really don't have high hopes for how sound our national defense strategy is going to be. And I think that's another indicator to me that the American empire is in decline. This is something I talk about quite frequently, and not looking good. Another reason to start a neighborhood preparedness network, or neighborhood watch, or an area preparedness network in your county, which I'll get to at the end of today's show. By the way, go ahead and drop your questions here into the chat, including over on the high side. I got to bring this chat back up on the high side. If you'll just give me 2 seconds here. So France has some elections coming up. Let me pop this thing out. France has 2 elections coming up, and they are, there we go. They are both presidential elections. Macron is running for re-election. And you know who's in a close second right now is Marine Le Pen. And her party used to be called the National Front. Now I think they're called National Rally. And she's an ardent nationalist, and National Front is a nationalist group, nationalist party. They're often referred to as the fascist party. Here's the deal, though, on these French elections right now, actually under Macron. And I'll forgive you if you haven't heard about this, but under Macron right now, France is closing down more mosques than they ever have been in France. and they're targeting these mosques allegedly that, quote, cultivate a feeling of hate towards France. This is happening under Macron. Can you imagine what is going to happen under Marine Le Pen? Sorry, I said Marianne. It's Marine Le Pen. My guess is that mass deportations from France becomes a lot more likely. This is something that I know has been floated in France. I don't think seriously by Macron. But you look at the relationship of elections where right-wing leaders have been elected in the United States and in Europe. And I do think if elections are free and fair, I do think we're on the cusp of having a full Republican sweep in government, because obviously the kind of foregone conclusion at this point, the conventional wisdom says Republicans are going to take the House and the Senate. You know what's a really, really good indicator? Kenosha, Wisconsin has not had a Republican, what is it, mayor, I think, that just got elected. Kenosha, Wisconsin has not had a Republican mayor in something like 40 years. And guess who was just elected? Was it the mayor? Yeah. Oh, excuse me. It's not the mayor. First ever Republican county executive elected in Kenosha County, Wisconsin. I think that's a very good indicator of politically what's ahead. And also, if we think going back to UKIP and Brexit, going all the way back to that was the kind of the indicator that predicted a Trump victory here in the United States. It was actually kind of the first indicator. But you look at this relationship between right-wing shifts in American politics and right-wing shifts in European politics, and I think Marine Le Pen has a chance, which means we're going to see a lot more. Actually, you want to know what's probably going to happen if Le Pen gets elected. They've been, for like the past 10 years, they've been talking about the EU collapsing, and Macron has been talking, and some other people have been talking about, oh, we need a European Union army. And because they said, oh, NATO's too weak, we need an EU army. And I think they're just trying to keep EU together. But there have been a lot of predictions that the EU is going to collapse. I would not be at all surprised if Marine Le Pen does get elected. We start to see a big push for that. And obviously that's going to cause massive problems throughout the EU, the EU's governance, if they do start mass deportations of their Middle Eastern, North African, Sub-Saharan populations that live in France right now. Let's move on to this story that I read in Financial Times this morning about investors buying up U.S. farmland. Look, this is nothing new, but this is an interesting take here. According to the Department of Agriculture, about 70% of U.S. farmland is set to change hands in the next 20 years. And the report states institutional investors are poised to gain a bigger share as old farmers retire. Now, this is something that Jim Rogers has been talking about back since probably like the 1990s when he wrote Hot Commodities, which is a book. Jim Rogers is a financial guy. He actually co-founded the Quantum Fund with George Soros. Somehow, apparently, I don't know, Jim Rogers is not a billionaire. I don't know how that didn't happen, but Jim Rogers, he's an interesting guy. I stopped listening, for a long time I listened to him because I thought he was insightful. I thought he had a lot of very interesting things to say, a lot of interesting predictions, especially about the future, as Yogi Berra might say. And I had to stop listening to him because he predicted, it's like every year from 2012 to maybe 2016, 17, I don't know, every single year he predicted a recession. And after that, after like the third or fourth, fifth year, I was like, man, you just can't listen to this guy anymore. But he still makes the rounds in these financial circles. He's occasionally on one of these financial talk show programs here. But one of the things that Jim Rogers said is that in the future, farmers are going to be driving Ferraris. And he said, look, the way eventually we're going to max out on crop yields. The world's getting bigger, more mouths to feed, more demand for food. And, Farmer Joe's going to be driving a Lamborghini one day. And he said this, I want to say he said this back in his book, Hot Commodities, which I think was published back in the 90s. At any rate, I find that interesting. One of the things that Jim Rogers said is that the age of the average farmer, and this is like, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, is 55 years old. He said, 10 years later, he said, oh, the average age of the farmer is 65 years old. How many of these guys are going to be farming into their 70s? And I think this is one reason why, according to the USDA, 70% of American farmland is going to be up for sale. What did they say? Over the next 20 years. And so investors are coming in and buying it. There's a really, really good quote here from a farmer. He says, I'm not going to buy $20,000 per acre farm ground. Good Lord. He continues, land prices have jumped in the last 2 years. If there's an investor who wants to do it, perfect. Let them take on the risk. And let me Google this right here. Average age of American farmers. It's got to be pushing. Okay, according to this, in 2017, it was 57 and a half years. Yeah, I don't know. I'll try to look up. I'll try to look up more recent statistics, but that's pretty old there. At any rate, yeah, these guys can't farm forever. And so there's been a big push by Tom Vilsack. He's the Department of Agriculture Secretary, trying to get more minorities involved, trying to get more young people, trying to get veterans involved in farming, because I think they also realize that America's farmers are aging. And as this has happened, the concentration of food production has been centralized. And of course, that was the big lesson in 2020. One of the I don't know if this guy's an investment advisor or what, but apparently he runs like some kind of real estate investment company that invests in a lot of farmland. He says, quote, the worry is they are investing. He's talking about institutional institutional investors through REITs and through these other investment vehicles buying up farmland. He says, quote, the worry is they're investing into office buildings right before COVID, end quote. So I'm not sure if we're going to see, maybe we're going to see land prices, farmland turnover twice, once to the investors. And then once they realize they can't farm it, they'll turn it over to, I don't know, maybe some real farmers. But all that does not bode well for the United States. I shouldn't say the United States, for Americans, more concentration of land ownership, more concentration of food production. And it's too bad the USDA is, not looking out for, mainly for the smaller farmers who are, some of whom may be going out of business even more. USDA, you probably remember USDA paid farmers not to grow food, paid farmers to go disc their fields, vegetables, literally laying in the field. Don't care. Go disc it and turn that field up and we'll pay you for it. Dump out milk, and how many millions of gallons of milk was poured out or whatever. So at any rate, the U.S. farming situation is not going to improve. Here's the other thing that concerns me on the prices of farmland. We have the saying, how do you become a millionaire in farming or in ranching? Start off a billionaire. And one of the problems is that a lot of these farmers are they're land rich and cash poor. Some of them, not all of them. Some farmers do very well. But a lot of them are land rich and cash poor. So when they die, especially these family farms that have been in the family for 50, 100, 200 years, there's all this land. And then the farmer dies. He tries to pass it on to his kids. Maybe he's lucky and one of his kids didn't move to the big city and wants to go into farming. And all of a sudden they're stuck with this massive tax bill, the death tax or the estate tax now. And because their farm is on paper worth, I don't know, $20 million or $50 million or whatever it's worth on paper, these people, they can't afford taxes on that. So they got to parcel it out and sell it up, or, sell off half of it just to pay the taxes on it, which is just incredibly unfair to those family farms. Again, that's just the government not looking out for small farmers, unfortunately. Let's, by the way, Ben, if you can help grab some of these questions here, post them in the comments, or post them in our private chat, and I'll get to them here in just a second. I want to move on to BRICs now. BRICs, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. I was doing a little bit of research on where they stand on this whole Russia-Ukraine thing, where they stand on this future of finance here. Jair Bolsonaro, he's the president of Brazil. He said, quote, we will not, he's talking about what's he going to do, side with the United States or side with Russia. And he says, we will not take sides. We will continue being neutral and help with whatever is possible, end quote. Moving on to the R in BRICs, Russia. Don't need to look into that. Next is India, and they've been looking into this arrangement whereby they continue direct trade with Russia in some kind of partial ruble agreement. They want to maintain their foreign policy independence, and this is very interesting to me. One official who knows who this guy is, he was quoted, but he's an unnamed source. He said, "quote It's not easy to undo starting this new financial alliance away from the U.S. dollar." He says it's not easy to do, not easy to undo once the crisis goes. So once the crisis goes away, India doesn't want to take this big step off the ledge and then have to come back into the orbit of the dollar or the orbit of the United States after this crisis fades, which, by the way, it could be next week. I don't know. It could be next year. Nobody knows. As has been said, Zelensky, I even hate this because it's almost just become cliche at this point. But yeah, Zelensky wants to fight to the last Ukrainian. So who knows how long it's going to take them to make this, make any kind of ceasefire or peace deal. Move on to China. China's a Russian ally. We won't go into that too much further. And then we get to the end of BRICS in South Africa. In South Africa, their president is a Ramaphosa, something like that. He said he wants to take a balanced approach. So again, he's not choosing sides. And well, that's the BRICS. This is some people are talking up this BRICS financial alliance, and what are the chances that the BRICS can find some kind of commodity-backed currency that they may be able to use? I don't know. Let me add a couple of additional data points here. So I think it was 2 weeks ago, Larry Fink wrote his letter to investors, his annual letter to investors. And one of the things he said, in addition to the end of globalization, one of the things he said he thinks may be happening is that what's happening now may result in greater use of digital currencies. And he was very open to the idea that as countries move away from the dollar, maybe they turn to digital currency. That may be the digital yuan. It may be a decentralized currency. I can tell you, one of the reasons why by the way, this is not financial advice. One of the reasons why I am bullish overall on Ripple XRP is because there has been talk in financial and banking circles about Ripple becoming maybe the next SWIFT system, the digital SWIFT system. As a matter of fact, the 2021 Financial Markets Conference, which was hosted by the Atlanta Fed, one of their panels, they were talking about Ripple becoming a replacement for SWIFT in the future. And again, who knows, that may go absolutely nowhere, but I was already somewhat bullish on Ripple, and I heard that and I said, you know what, man, it's kind of worth just the shot in the dark here, worth the upside potential on it. To go ahead and take that risk. Yeah, Dogecoin is going to be next reserve currency. Maybe on Mars, not going to be on Earth. Also, after Fink, I've got a note here from the IMF, and Gita, whatever her name is, she's like the assistant director over at the IMF. 2 or 3 weeks ago, she started talking about the fragmentation of the global dollar-backed financial system, and she says what's probably going to end up happening is as we have a multipolar world, these poles and these spheres of influence are going to be using a regional reserve currency. In so many words, this is what she's getting at. And so I did say Dogecoin. So this whole point being, this is not an overnight thing. This is not an overnight process. This is a decadal process. And I know I've said that a billion times. And that's because I'm just not seeing any signs that it's going to happen quickly. It is happening, but it's not going to be overnight. And I was just looking at foreign reserves. I'll give you a quick update on that. Right now, globally, 59% of foreign reserves held at central banks are 59% is in US dollars, followed by euros at 20%, followed by uh, other various currencies at 7%, followed by the Japanese yen at 5.7%, followed by the British pound sterling at 4.7%. And then finally, we get to the Chinese yuan at 2.6%. US dollar 59%, the yuan 2.6%. Massive disparity there. This is why this is not going to be uh, an overnight process. And I want to even say, who was it? Was it JP Morgan or maybe Bank of America? I don't know. Some massive investment bank said in the next 10 years, we may see the we may see the Chinese yuan become like 5 to 10% maybe of all foreign held reserves. So we're not even in a position where we're talking about the Chinese yuan becoming a global world reserve currency. Nowhere close. And frankly, I think there's a lot better currencies out there than the yuan. For one, it's just they don't have transparent markets. They don't have look, China may be heading towards their own 2008 right now. I talked about that briefly over on the high side this morning when I gave my economic early warning brief. And so maybe if the dust settles on that, maybe China can emerge and do something. But as long as the Chinese Communist Party is in control, they're very they play their cards very close. They're not transparent. They don't have massive credit markets like the United States. They don't have massive capital markets like the United States. So I am just not incredibly worried about the yuan at this point. All right. Before I jump into talking about establishing a preparedness network, which, by the way, everybody should be doing, Ben, I'll get to a few of these questions here. Do you think America is losing its technological edge to China? What can we expect in, say, 15 years? In 15 years, it's funny that you say that because the U.S. Army came out like, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago or so and said that China would probably gain military parity with the United States sometime between like 2035 and 2040. There's probably some areas where Chinese excel, and maybe they are as good as the United States technologically. That's not in a lot of places, but again, they are maybe 15 years out from that. So that's something that the Army has admitted, and that's something they expect is the Chinese to gain military parity within the next 15 years. Next question. What are your thoughts on the application of intelligence on food security within the community? Thoughts? I tell you what, if you could develop relationships with managers at your local grocery stores and get them to tell you like, yeah, I don't know, last week we got 1,000 pounds of beef shipped in. And this week we got 900. And next week we're only going to get 850 pounds of beef or whatever, because our distributors have less on hand. Does that have intelligence value? Well, that certainly is a trend. And yes, that may mean, at some point in the future, you're going to have a lot less beef to choose from in your community. So yeah, I actually do think there's a place for intelligence on food security locally. And again, that's going to come from your grocery store managers or from whoever does from grocery purchasers, or maybe distribution warehouses, distribution facilities. If there's people who work in those places who also local ranchers, I think, are probably a good source of that kind of information. Also look at establishing relationships with your local beef processor, because a lot of those are still mom and pop, not many, but some of them are still mom and pop shops. And, if you know a rancher who frequents that, you might just say, hey, can you ask those guys over at, I don't know, Bob's beef processing store or whatever. Can you ask him kind of what are the trends? Like, what's he seeing? Is he worried about the beef supply? Is he worried about more shortages in the future? And when you start asking people to ask their friends all this information, you're actually conducting human intelligence gathering, which is exactly what you should be doing locally anyway. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that here when we jump on this preparedness network. All right. What do you think will happen to supply chains if China experiences a US 2008? Well, Chinese PMI is already is again in contraction. It hit the lowest point since February 2020, which, by the way, is recession. So I think China's already going into a recession. The People's Bank of China came out this week and said, yeah, we're going to be a lot more supportive or accommodative. They said they're going to try to stem some systemic financial risks that exist. And I think there's a decent chance. Now, granted, I don't live there. I've never been to China, and I certainly am not reading Chinese financial statements all day. But from my understanding, there's many trillions of dollars in the shadow banking system in China, many trillions of dollars in off the books debt. And then you have derivatives on that debt, just like we had in 2008. So if China does have a 2008 and they do go into a very steep recession, I mean, man, whatever, listen, cheap Chinese crap makes the United States world go round right now. All the stuff you buy at Walmart, it's going to be like, mid to late 2020 when we started having these massive supply chain issues because China shut down for a while due to COVID. And by the way, China may still shut down. They've been doing this. First, it was called zero COVID policy. And then they realized, oh, yeah, we're not going to be able to do that. Now it's called dynamic zero, where they're just shutting, I think it was in Shanghai the other day. They shut down half the city, or maybe it was another place. They just shut down half the city instead of the whole thing. And that's their dynamic zero policy. So it just means more expensive goods, and it means a lot less availability. Basically, anything that you get from China, if they do have a 2008 financial meltdown and they go into deep recession, then probably expect another disruption like we've seen for the past, roughly 2 years or so. All right. Will the countries that adopt? Oh shoot! You know what? Man, I'm sorry. I read the clock wrong. Here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna finish up these last couple of questions. In tomorrow's show, we're gonna do Preparedness Network for the whole 30 minutes, and maybe if we have some time, I'll ask your questions here at the end. Could you get Clay Martin on? Yes, there's a probably 90% chance we can get Clay Martin on, and maybe in the next couple of weeks we can have him on a Friday warning roundtable to get his thoughts on how things are shaping up. All right. Will countries that adopt decentralized currencies last or make them illegal? Okay. Will the countries that adopt decentralized currency last? I don't know. Look, El Salvador. I just watched this thing on Bloomberg about Bitcoin in El Salvador, and basically all the old people can't figure Bitcoin out. They want to know why it's worth more yesterday and why it's worth less today. And this is a generational thing. Even you look at old stodgy finance, old finance, as opposed to new decentralized finance. You look at old fi, and even they've been very slow to adopt cryptocurrency. Very slow. I think maybe they weren't slow to recognize the potential, but they're struggling to. They're going to need government intervention to control new finance or decentralized, or try to control decentralized finance, just like they've used the government to control existing finance. So I don't know. It's too early. I tell you what, a really great book, a fantastic book, is called The Sovereign Individual. And in that book, they talk about what they think the future of the world looks like. And I've explained that several times on the show, and maybe we can jump into that during another show. All right, gang, listen, that does it for me today. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., I'm going to do the whole show on getting started with the Preparedness Network. I got a little checklist here that you can do and some advice. I'm going to talk about how we have grown our Preparedness Network here locally, reaching out to multiple counties, and you absolutely need to be doing the same. It's for your future, and if you don't, you'll die. Dustin, I'm just kidding. Dustin's going to be on the Daily SA tomorrow at 9 a.m. We'll be back in your inbox then. By the way, we don't have a Patreon. There's no buy me a coffee link. If you want to support the show, you can do that at www.forwardobserver.com/subscribe. I'll be back on tomorrow, 2 p.m. We're talking Preparedness Network. So tell your friends and be here. Let's try to get a new record for views. Until then, be well and stay out front.